If you have a copy of the scriptures with you this morning, I do invite you to join me in the New Testament book of Colossians. In a moment, I'm going to be reading from Colossians chapter 3. In a moment, it'll be the first 10 verses. But we've been in this series, The Sacred Heart of Jesus, and we only have this week and next week. And we're wrapping up this series before we move on to other series. Actually, we're as we've been thinking about what we're going to be preaching on next, we don't have a whole lot of time left before we actually enter Advent. Can you believe that? I know we're getting ready for Halloween, but Advent is just right around the corner. So, but we do have 2 more Sundays in this series, and each week we've been exploring a different aspect of the character of Jesus. As we've been getting to know his heart, searching throughout the scriptures to seek out these revelations of who Jesus is and what the heart of God looks like. But more than that, how we can have his heart within us. We are called to live Christ-like lives, and what that actually means is that we have the life of Christ living within us, that his will is being enacted in our day-to-day lives. And so we've gone through different aspects of Jesus' character and looked at some different areas, like how he's hospitable and generous, how he's patient and steadfast, how he's merciful and just and compassionate, and all these different things. And this week is one I've saved kind of more towards the end, because it's one that I think required more thought on my behalf, because it's a little difficult to grasp. It's a little difficult to articulate. And so bear with me as I attempt to articulate how the heart of Jesus is mystical and revolutionary. The heart of Jesus being something that is mystical and revolutionary. And the text I'd like for us to begin with is in Colossians chapter 3. I'm going to start in verse 1. Hear the word of the Lord. So if you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on the things that are above and not on things that are on earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, is revealed, then you will also be revealed with him in glory. Put to death, therefore, whatever in you is earthly: fornication, impurity, passion, evil desire, and greed, which is idolatry. On account of these, the wrath of God is coming on those who are disobedient. These are the ways you also once followed when you were living that life. But now you must get rid of all such things: anger, wrath, malice, slander, and abusive language from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have stripped off the old self with its practices, and have clothed yourself with the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge according to the image of its Creator. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. This week I came across this comic strip that I have a picture of it, and you might not be able to see everything, but it's these mice in a maze, and if you can see kind of in the back there, there's this Zen mouse, who's back there meditating, being very contemplative. And the other mouse apparently went to this guru mouse for advice, and he's going back to his friend to report what he learned. And he says, he said the true maze is inside us. So, not super helpful, right? They're actually in a maze, and they're trying to get out. And this this mystical mouse is pointing them towards an inward maze, which they find not particularly useful. And this is often how mystics are seen. You know, we have these ideas of mystic teachers, and every branch of religion has mystics in it, and have these type of teachers that we can view as being rather irrelevant to our lives. They say things that are intriguing and have a great depth in one sense, but in another sense, we're left feeling like, well, that doesn't really apply to my life. That doesn't actually help me with my problems right here, right now. But this mystic mouse, and even in this little comic strip, does have something that the other two mice don't have. This mouse has inner calm, right? He has a sense of peace and contentment. But it might be safe to say that the other two mice probably have a better chance of being successful in their mission. They probably have a better chance of getting to the end of the maze or getting out of the maze. Or then again, maybe not. I don't know. I don't want to stretch the metaphor too far. But there's something that mystic mouse does have. And sort of, I don't want to spread this metaphor too far, but there is a maze that we're all in. This metaphor of the maze that we're trapped in. And then the maze can be any number of things. The maze could be oppressive forces in this world that you're experiencing. And it can be oppressive forces from religious oppression. It can be secular oppression. It can be oppression from major organizations. It can be oppression from family systems. It can be oppressions from things like drugs. It can be oppressive things of spiritual natures. Sin being an oppressive force on your life to keep you down. And we all, I think, have felt this, can relate to this metaphor of being stuck or being trapped in a maze or being oppressed and wanting to find a way out. Whatever that trap might be, whatever that maze might be. And living kind of in this modern world, we're also kind of on top of all this faced with what the author Henry Nouwen described as these technological paradoxes that kind of leave our mind boggled, because we're flooded with mass media of wonderful technological advances, such as heart transplants, and how we can put so much time and energy and resources and research and money into taking someone else's heart and putting it into another person's heart, and then they are now living with that heart. And it's this modern medical miracle that this is something that we can do, and it is incredible. But then at the same time, we also have to face the reality that there are 9 million people who die every year from hunger. And it's difficult for us to reconcile that we can save someone's life whose heart is failing, but we can't save the lives of 9 million people who don't have something as simple as food. We have technological advances where we can send people into space and go to the moon, and if you know, like Elon Musk wants to colonize Mars, and these are and these aren't things that are too far, from taking place one day, but these are goals that could happen, and we have all these technological advances where we can go to space and do all of these wonderful things, but yet we cannot stop war on this planet. So we're left with these paradoxes that we can't reconcile. And it might leave you feeling like, where's the way out? There seem to be two main responses to these dilemmas we face. People trying to gain a sense of freedom, a sense of liberation from these oppressions, from these paradoxes. And the two main ways to find this freedom that people go down is revolution and mysticism. And so by mysticism, I mean that people turn inward, right? If we cannot solve the problems out there, then we can go inwardly. We can journey inward. If we can't find peace on earth, we can find peace within. If we can't find the solutions out there, we can make our own solutions in here. And by kind of the word mystic, I mean someone who is attuned to the spiritual realities. Because we know that there is more to existence, there's more to reality than just what we can experience with our five senses. Right? We believe in a spiritual realm that is interconnected with the physical realm, and so mystics are known as people who are more connected to spiritual reality. Of course, the other way that people find liberation is sort of on the other end of the spectrum, is being a revolutionary. And revolutionaries, they see the problems at hand. They see the problems of the world. They see the problems of society or religion or government or whatever the problems are, and they want to do something about it now. They want to fight for a change here and now and into the coming future. So that might mean they want to dismantle all the corrupt, oppressive systems and build something new. They want to protest against the things that are causing harm and to work towards things that create goodness and healing. And so we have examples all throughout history of people doing this, of revolting against oppressive powers, of seeing the death and the pain and the dilemma and the paradoxes and wants to fight for freedom. We see this heavily in the New Testament. Right? There were revolutionaries they were being oppressed by the Roman Empire. And the Jewish people were looking for someone to lead a revolt, to take on the Roman Empire, to take down the oppressive system that was Rome. This person they called the Messiah. And so we have these two paths, right? The path of mysticism and the path of being a revolutionary. And the question for us that we kind of are wrestling with is there a third way? Is there a third way in Christ? As we study the life and teachings of Jesus, I think what we see is that Jesus is both a mystic and a revolutionary. He's mystic and he's a revolutionary. Sometimes we read his teachings. And if you're reading through the Gospels, if you're reading his words and teachings, sometimes he says things that might leave you wondering, what was he talking about? I didn't quite follow what Jesus was saying. Jesus uses a lot of parables. He uses a lot of metaphor to describe heavenly realities. He talks a lot about the spiritual world. He talks a lot about the kingdom of heaven, which is not a kingdom of this world. It's not a kingdom that we can see. It's not a kingdom that we can go to the voting booths and participate in that way. It's not a kingdom that we can show up physically and experience in that way, but yet he talks a lot about the kingdom of heaven. But since all we know is really this world that we live in and experience, and that he uses the language of this world to describe heavenly realities. So he gives parables. He gives parables like the wheat and the weeds that sort of explain why there are all these good things and bad things that happen together. Why good and evil coexist, and why good people and bad people both seem to be able to flourish. And why aren't the good people being rewarded and the bad people being punished? And this parable reveals to us the work of the enemy and how in this parable that if we pull out the weeds, we destroy the wheat as well until the day of the harvest. We have parables about prayer, which is very much a spiritual, heavenly reality. We have parables about things that reveal God's heart. We have parables of the missing coin and the missing sheep and the missing prodigal son. And it reveals to us how God seeks out those who are lost, those who are missing from his kingdom, and how he desperately wants those who are missing from his presence to come into his presence, and how much joy is in all of heaven when one sinner comes to be with Jesus. But Jesus was also quite the revolutionary. Yes, he spoke very mystically, and he spoke in sometimes these cryptic messages that are hard to understand sometimes, but he was also very much a revolutionary. And even though he wasn't of this world, he came into the world. God incarnate came into the world in flesh and blood and lived on earth an earthly life. This is a big indicator that he is taking life on earth seriously. He's not just some mystic who only thinks about spiritual things. He is very much in the world. He spoke out against the corrupt systems of his day, both in the religious world and in the secular world. He became quite the critic of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes and the chief priests and the whole religious order. He put wrenches in their religious systems. He upended things. He went in the temple and turned over tables. And he really was quite the revolutionary in the religious realm. He undermined the cruel King Herod. He defied Pilate, even as he stood in Pilate's court. He defied him and told him, you have no real power over me. If I wanted to leave, I could leave. Jesus' whole life, his whole teaching stood in opposition to the Roman Empire and Caesar himself. Caesar, who called himself Son of God, now there is this Jesus walking around who's taking that title as the true Son of God. His life and his teachings and everything he did was very much a revolutionary thing in this world. But he didn't lead the kind of revolution that people expected. He didn't take up arms and go to war with Rome. He didn't plan assassinations and prison escapes. Instead, he describes his kingdom as in another parable as like a mustard seed. And if you're not familiar with this parable very much, then let me tell you that the mustard plant was a weed. And people didn't want mustard in their garden because it grew like a weed, and it spread, and it took over things, and it was ugly. It's not a pretty plant. And so Kathleen's saying, no, you like mustard plants, huh? All right, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. But in the first century, people did not want mustard in their garden. And so Jesus gives this parable, and he talks about a gardener who intentionally plants mustard in his garden. And it's a tiny little seed. And he plants it in the garden, but it does what mustard plants do. It begins to grow, though it starts very tiny. It begins to grow out. It begins to choke out other plants. It grows kind of big and wrangly into a big bush. A bush so big that it's about the size of a tree, but not like when you picture a tree, don't picture these mighty, massive trees like the cedars of Lebanon. No, it's not that kind of tree. It's not these 150-foot beautiful, majestic trees. The mustard tree is this wrangly, I'm sorry, Kathleen, unattractive mess of a bush. And it grows big and it's untamed. But then Jesus says that, and then the animals come and take shelter in this big, messy mustard bush. It's not the polished kingdom that sometimes I think about. It's not this put together, where everything is just beautiful, like these mighty cedars of Lebanon. It's this mingly bush that's untamable, that takes over and grows. And even though it starts small, it spreads. And you look at the New Testament, you look at Acts, you look at the first church, the early church, and you can see how the early church was that mustard bush. It started small and then it started growing, and it was oppressed, it was crushed. But the thing about mustard seeds is that when you crush a mustard seed, it becomes more powerful, which is an indicator of also Jesus' death. The enemy thought he was crushing Jesus on that cross, but in reality, he was growing more powerful. And so when the early church was crushed, they became more potent. And they grew more rapidly. And they weren't this beautiful, organized structure. They were this wrangly, chaotic mess of disciples of Jesus trying to figure out all of this out, growing, faster than they could handle. But people were coming to them and finding shelter in the branches of the church. And this is what the church looks like. Because this is what the kingdom of heaven looks like. And it challenges things, and it changes things. And even though the people were oppressed, they lived in such a way that challenged the way that other people thought. It challenged the way they understood how the world worked. It understood how they viewed the poor. It understood how they viewed the disabled. It changed everything about the first century. It challenges religious systems. It challenges economic systems. It challenges governmental systems. But it doesn't begin there. It begins with a mystical revolution. The revolution of Jesus begins with what we call conversion. And sometimes I say that word. I don't like it sometimes. Conversion. It sounds so blah. I don't know. Do we need a different name for it? I don't have a solution, sorry. Paul talks about being transferred, but transferred isn't really a great term either. I'm going to, like you're at a bus station, I'm getting transferred from this, I don't know. But being transferred from the domain of darkness to the kingdom of light. So I don't know, give some thought on what a good word for that might be. But I don't know, conversion, like you're converting money from like dollars to euros. I don't know. Conversion. Whenever we put on the old self, take off the old self and put on the new self. How about that Paul talks about? It begins with that mystical revolution that takes place within us. Because at our conversion, something mystical does happen. Paul writes about it in Colossians 3. I'll read it again, just the first 4 verses. So if you have been raised with Christ, that's that conversion or resurrection or whatever. If you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. For you have died. You have died. And your life is hidden with Christ in God. Just absorb that for a moment, because this is mystical thinking here. You have died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, when he is revealed, then you will be revealed with him in glory. Have a headache yet thinking about like trying to what is Paul talking about here? I am dead. My life is with Christ in heaven. Like, it's almost like we're torn. Our life is there in heaven with God, hidden with him. Jesus talks about in Matthew, he says to seek first the kingdom of heaven. And he tells us that where your heart is, there your treasure will be also. So our heart is to be in heaven. Our life is to be in heaven. And yet at the same time, our bodies, our minds, everything else is still here on earth. And so we're a torn people. On the one hand, we do claim residency in the kingdom of heaven, but at the same time, we also must live here on earth. Maybe you feel that tension sometimes. It's a mystical tension. It's a revolutionary tension. It reminds us of where our life really is, where our mind should be focused on. Earlier in the chapter, in Colossians chapter 1, Paul is praying for the Colossians. And in verse 9, he writes this to them. He says, "For this reason, since the day we heard it, we have not ceased praying for you, asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of God's will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so that you may lead lives worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him, as you bear fruit in every good work, and as you grow in the knowledge of God. May you be made strong with all the strength that comes from his glorious power. And may you be prepared to endure everything with patience, while joyfully giving thanks to the Father who has enabled you to share in the inheritance of the saints in the light. He has rescued you from the power of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption and forgiveness of sins." That's a big vision that Paul is casting for our lives. A vision of a life filled with knowledge and wisdom, of power and strength, all from the source of heaven. That our lives would be animated by this source. That our bodies would find strength from this source. That we would share in this inheritance of the saints as we live now in the kingdom of light, because that's where our residence is. In the kingdom of light, in the kingdom of his Son, where we have redemption and forgiveness of sins. And so this mystic revolution, it begins within us. Some deep, powerful work, spiritual, mystical work is taking place within us. But it isn't confined there. We confess faith in Jesus, who is the King of heaven and earth. We profess how he is the one over every power on heaven, on earth, and under the earth. He is the King of everything. And so the true mystic is not someone who is only concerned with spiritual matters, but also with earthly ones. Because we know that they're interconnected. We know that you cannot separate the spiritual world from the physical world. So mystics have to be revolutionaries. And a true revolutionary must be a mystic at heart. Otherwise, as we see, revolutions just lead to repeating the same sins over again. If there's an oppressive power, a revolution might rise up to take down that oppressive power, only to replace it as the next oppressive power. That's a big sign that mysticism is missing from that revolution. This revolution that takes place within us, it upends everything. Jesus calls us in John, as he's talking to the Pharisee Nicodemus, he says, if you want to see the kingdom of heaven, you have to be born from above. He says, truly, I tell you, if you want to see the kingdom of heaven, you have to be born of water and spirit. Water and spirit. And then you will be able to live in the fullness of reality, not just the physical reality, not just the spiritual reality, but the fullness of all reality. And we are the ones called to reflect this reality. But in order for us to do this, we must be accurately attuned. We must be attuned to our lives. And where are our lives? Where are they? Hidden with Christ in God. And that's where our heart is. We're here and we're there. But we must be attuned to that inwardly. We must know that, so that we can fully live in both realities simultaneously, in heaven and on earth. And then the church, then we can show the rest of the world what this life in reality really looks like. And Jesus will lead us there. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your Son Jesus, and God, and how he lived both mystically and revolutionary, in a revolutionary way perfectly. How he is showing us every day what it means to live on this earth while at the same time having our lives with you in heaven. So God, we confess that sometimes we feel stuck, we feel frustrated by the dilemmas of this world, by the paradoxes we experience. But we ask for what Paul prayed for the Colossians, that you would fill us with all of your wisdom, that you would shape us with knowledge. The knowledge of you who are making us and shaping us with our new self according to your image. Give us wisdom and strength and might from your throne as we place our feet firmly here on earth, but while our minds are fixed on the things that are above. And grant us your peace as we get to know ourselves more, as we draw closer into you. Guide us. We put our trust in you. In the name of your Son, Jesus, who loved us and gave himself for us. Amen.